decade ago, the sex war was raging, and women carried their challenge for liberation into the workforce, the bedroom, and onto the streets. 10 years later, the heat's gone out of the battle. Women have achieved much of what they sought: equal pay, equal opportunity, anti-discrimination legislation, and women's refuges. The structures for change are in place. But individual change is still a personal struggle, and Women's Lib doesn't have many of the answers, as sociologists Cecelia Morris and Ian Marshall discovered.
What it hasn't brought about is how people manage when they choose the freedom to do something different. How do they manage personally? So on that personal level, the women's liberation movement hasn't really, well, it did a great job and it organised women as a whole, a unity, but then as a collective, when it came to meeting individual needs, that's where the problems seem to be now and still are,
Even these women who seem to have broken through, found their freedom, made choices for themselves, the impression I got from the book was that not a lot of them are terribly happy anyway.
No, not a lot are. A lot are sitting out there in a nothingness, looking for still the right man to come along. That's still going along, that myth, on the knight in shining armour, etc. Or looking for that identity, trying to find who they are. Where am I and where am I going and who am I? So it's not too optimistic.
Back to square one.
Back to square one, but that awareness is there. So it's square two, but where do we go from now?
There is also a bit of confusion about the type of woman you talk to. Now, I can take you to a room full of housewives who are struggling with advanced education.
Beatrice Foust, feminist writer.
4 jobs even. They've got their home jobs, they've got their educational commitment. They may be doing a part-time job to earn money. They may also be active in some form of political activity such as childcare or the local council. And they're much more heavily committed than a similar group of men would be. The frustration level in that sort of group is very, very high. But I could equally take you to a group of employed women. There's one that I eat with, a ladies eating out group, where we network once a month. And the morale is unbelievable, it's like bathing in champagne.
Most confused seem to be those women who matured during the movement's heyday. Many took advantage of the newfound freedoms and career opportunities. Yet they're still burdened with the emotional baggage of early conditioning about motherhood and the woman's role. Tina Owens, for example, is 31. She gave up a successful teaching career to stay home with her 2 daughters.
The urge came to have children. And yes, it didn't hurt to give it up. I was ready to give it up at that point of time for the children.
But though the choice was easy, the reality hasn't been.
There is a conflict. It appears when I start wanting to write and the children are herding around, and I feel guilty when I say go away, or when I shove them off into a creche so that I can go and walk around the gallery just because I need that break. There is a guilt that I'm not being the right kind of mother.
Do you feel this urge sometimes to get back to work, to
Yes, I do. And whenever I have forays of it, the conflicts that arise within the family and the conflicts that arise within my head as to whether I should be doing it or not, where my priorities lay, it is a matter of values and priorities, always make it very difficult. When I'm involved in doing the creative thing, like I do pottery, I'm away from the children, I'm away from the house, and I can totally involve myself. I forget about the guilt, but it's the getting to the place or getting to sit down and do the work.
For Kitty Vego, there's less conflict and guilt. A former journalist turned full-time student, she waited 8 years before having children. Her husband wanted a child, and now that daughter Kate is 2, he's paying for a creche so that Kitty can study part-time. An understanding husband, it seems, is vital.
Yes, but I think it's a fairly rare man that can do it these days. In fact, with the marriages that are breaking down amongst my friends, it's because a woman's grown and the man has either resented it or couldn't cope with it. Whereas I've been lucky enough to be married to someone who has sort of grown with me too. He sort of, he sees the logic in all of this and accepts it as being natural.
But then, I mean, you're in a fairly privileged situation. I mean, you can afford to stay home while your husband works. He had indulged you before even the baby was along.
I'm the first to say that, actually. Yes, darling, except at moments like this, I think I'd rather be working.
Back in the Owens household, role-playing is the issue. When both worked, Tina and her husband shared the chores. Does your husband help much?
He's fantastic. I don't think that's another thing of luck. I don't think that I would have had all these opportunities if it hadn't have been for him and the backing of my family.
In what sense is he fantastic?
He'll look after the children if I want to go out. There's times when he gets me breakfast in bed. He knows I love that, so sometimes he does. If I'm tired, he'll help me. He'll bath Emily at night times.
Does he do this, though, as a matter of course, or is this a treat for you? I mean, does he just do it when he is feeling in a good mood, or is this part of your routine that he...
I usually have to sulk a bit for it.
Does he resent that sometimes, do you
Yes,
think?
he does. He does. He fluctuates. There are some times when he takes it as pleasure, but yes, I think he does underneath it all because he works all day. And then he comes home and he feels like he's got a clock on here, and that's hard for him.
But then you've been working all day.
That's it. And that's still to be resolved, and we're in the middle, we're working at that now. Breaking it. The transition stages are never easy, and that's what is happening here.
Kitty Vego claims to have pursued liberation within her marriage. But would she do it again?
Got married? No. Had a child? Probably not. I'd never marry again. I mean, I really am very happily married, but I'd never marry again. I think husbands are very sweet, dear creatures, but any relationship has to be really worked at. And as soon as you're working at something that involves another person, you've got so much less of your own life to live, which sounds terribly selfish.
But while middle-class women are struggling with these concepts about work and marriage, what of their sisters on the factory floor? Working for them is rarely a choice or a pleasure. Do you like working here?
Or it's a matter of have to.
Would you rather not work?
Yes, I would. I'd rather be home.
I like stay home. I got only 2 boys, nobody help me anyway. My husband just work in the garden, that's it.
He doesn't help you around the house?
No.
Do you ever ask him?
I ask sometimes, but so sorry, I got my job.
Do you think that's right?
Not right, but what I gonna do?
It is certainly true that a lot of women have all they can do to bring home a bit of extra money and look after their kids and pay the rent. And this is particularly true where the husband's unemployed or where perhaps you've got a single mother. But I don't see that that is a disadvantage as long as the women are aware.
Helen, do you know anything about women's liberation?
Not much.
Well, what do you know?
I really can't say.
I don't know nothing about women liberation.
Do you know much about women's lib?
No.
Why is that? Are you not interested?
Not as a feminist movement, but for your independence, yes, I know that part of it.
We found, of course, the difficulty in, and we did try to set up interviews with people from the working class. One, they haven't got time to think about such issues as choice. They're really too flat out trying to make a living. They haven't got time to think about, alternative lifestyles. They're having enough trouble scraping it together in the one lifestyles. They weren't articulate enough to be able to say, well, this is how I feel deep down. So it hasn't percolated down to that level.
So if this is women's lib 10 years on, what of the future? It's evident from Cecelia Morris's book that the ideas and aspirations of women's lib in the 80s seem to offer most to those who don't have to change or adapt. That is, those young men and women who've grown up with it.
They were thankful. I think that's so. Thankful for the hard work that's gone before and hopeful. And they certainly were making choices, and they were making choices that involved husbands studying, in one case husband or another's lovers, people they were living with, studying, staying at home, while the other partner went out to work. And this seemed to be fairly comfortable with the young people. There was no role stereotyping here.
And Beatrice Foust believes that despite economic pressures having reversed the mood of hope, freedom and change that gave birth to Women's Lib, its philosophies will prevail.
The way I see it, although the situation is grim, women are meeting that situation with a great deal of courage and intelligence and ingenuity and tenacity. They haven't just folded up, they are in there fighting.
Jan McGuinness on the feminist balance sheet.